You're going to love this. Trust me, what you're seeing is just my normal state.
What are you talking about?
This is Superman. And this is what is known as a Superman who has ascended beyond. You can call it Superman 2.
But nothing's changed.
And this is to go even further beyond.
You've been playing Sparking Zero again, haven't you?
I'm maining Kaba. Hey everybody, Starfish Sicko aka Daniel here, and I'm back with a new Superman video with a restructured format. Now, I'd originally recorded this video a while back, but lost all the footage. But that wouldn't stop our boy Clark, now would it? So I won't let it stop me. So I want to thank everyone for their patience, and if you enjoy this sort of content, please like, share, subscribe. It really does go a long way to keeping me making these videos. This video will be the third in my Superman power scaling series, but serves more as a direct sequel to the first Superman, Lifting It All, link in the description. To summarize, in that video I discussed whether or not I believe Superman could hypothetically lift an infinite amount of weight. I came away finding that one of the feats was sort of dubious, two were acceptable with the right arguments, and one, in my opinion, that really fits the bill if you want to say Superman does lift an infinite amount of weight. Now, if you also want the long and short of my overall opinion, yes, I have zero problem believing that Superman could lift infinite weight, mostly because I can see a lot of writers actually writing him that way. After all, if they need something moved in the story, one of the first people they go to is Superman. But what happens if he needed to go further than that, and Superman needed to stretch his limits past concepts such as weight? In silly little hobbies like versus debating and power scaling, there tend to be two popular modes when talking about how strong a character is. Though, take note of this is a gross oversimplification. Those two modes are volume scaling and dimensional scaling. Volume scaling is easy to explain. If a character survives a planet or a star exploding in their face, you can calculate how much force they just withstood. If they destroy one, you can calculate their destructive output, and then we usually just shorthand that kind of stuff into saying a character's planet level, star level, that sort of thing. You can even use how much a character can lift to get certain insights into how strong they are. Though there are those that will use some feats to downplay some characters when comparing them to others. Let's be honest, we've all seen people guilty of this. Volume scaling is straightforward and overall easy to understand. It's why you see terms like star level and planet level thrown around so much. But if you've been in the power scaling community for any amount of time, I'm sure you've heard something like this. X characters 12D, they stomp. This is where we step away from calculating things like joules and step into the realm of theoretical physics, because a character has stepped beyond the realm of numbers. To once again make a long story short, if you are a dimension higher than someone, you are infinitely stronger than a person below you. It gets to the point where lower dimensional beings aren't even perceived as real to higher dimensional ones. 3D always loses to 4D, which always loses to 5D, and so on and so on. It's become something of a dimensional arms race in the versus battle community. Yes, we really do get fixated on these numbers, don't we? Because God help us if our favorites don't win. Am I right? Well, it's an impossible discussion to avoid, I guess. And in the case of DC Comics, it very much does work that way, even from a writer's perspective. In most cases, there's always exceptions to the rule. In my Infinite Weight video, I stated it wasn't even close to the high point we could get Superman to, and this is the reason. While I do believe Infinite Weight is impressive, it is still a lower dimensional concept. In versus debate terms, you could probably get it to high 3D. And in this video, we will be looking at times Superman has pushed past concepts such as weight. So, can Superman push himself beyond the bonds of reality and go even further? Let's dig into this together. First, some of my usual disclaimers. Despite the insistence of others, versus debating is not an exact science. If you don't want to accept any of these feats, and in a general discussion sense, I don't accept all of these myself, that's fine. And if you like them, no amount of calling it wank or an anti-feat will make it so. People are either going to accept the amount of examples you provide, or they won't. There is no reason for us all to talk past each other. And if you want my overall opinion, I prefer volume scaling most of the time. I find some dimensional scaling to be either sketchy, obtuse, or stretched just for the sake of getting a character wins. The reason I make these videos and talk about these feats isn't because I want Superman to win all the time. A lot of it has to do with me just loving the absurdity of comic books and talking about how strong some of these instances might make Superman. This isn't to say I don't welcome debate, everybody, especially in the comments. If you think I've misinterpreted something or maybe misrepresented a feat, or if you have a different standard for what you're willing to accept, please jump down there and let's discuss it. My only issue is it often devolves down to words like wank and lowball. Actual discussion is great. Dismission and name-calling, not so much. And with that, let's get started. So when I personally examine feats, I tend to use what was canon at the time, look at authorial intent, and see what meshes well enough. Others like to retroactively upgrade or downgrade characters based on the most up-to-date story, and that's fine too. With DC's dimensionality and how Superman scales there, things tend to get a little bit complicated. Because DC has so many writers across so many books, lack of consistency really shouldn't surprise anybody. And it's also important to remember, most writers aren't thinking about theoretical physics when crafting a story or how strong something might make a character. They are more interested in things like the characters themselves and the plot. This, of course, leads to contradictions. And it's often us fans that are superimposing scaling after the fact. Some writers, though, are very interested in these concepts and are very interested in the dimensionality of their universes, even a collaborative universe. More on that soon. For this video, I am going to be using a lot of books I've brought up before. Gee, it's almost like their choices were part of the intended build-up. But I may also use some others as supplementary examples. It would be easy enough to just show some of the strongest people that Superman has flown through, or maybe even just talking about some of his amped states. But honestly, I think those examples are best saved for another day. So how is Superman going to break the mold of reality and go beyond his first layer of infinity? For that, we're going to break this all down into little sections and books. Amped Punches is going to be first, followed by Breaking Dimensions, and finally, Breaking Concepts. Let's start with some of his amps, because of course the easy counter to the arguments to any of these feats are, he was amped. In a versus context though, to me anyway, it could be possible for Superman to access these particular amps, and I don't really count them as separate forms or versions of himself. Start our journey with our world at war. At first glance, the event spearheaded by Jeff Loeb, while having some neat feats, does leave a lot to be desired. Sure, you have Imperiex drones wiping out galaxies, but you're here for more than that. You want the big numbers. I got you, boo. Brainiac 13, while controlling Warworld, absorbs the energy of Imperiex, which contains the essence of the Big Bang. And when all hope seems lost, Superman sun dips for 15 minutes and is able to go pound for pound against that combination until he sends the source of entropy back in time so the energy can be safely released. So a 15-minute sun dip Superman was equivalent to the essence of the Big Bang. Volume-wise, that was 100 trillion light-years of mass. At the time, DC is now infinite in size. Never mind that. I'd like to call your attention to this panel, stating the universe existed in 11 spatial dimensions. Imperiex was going to destroy all of this and start anew. Time, space, everything. At least that's my read of events, and that seems to be what the story was getting across. So, at a low ball, destroying all time and space would put this at 4D, with a high ball being somewhere between 11-dimensional, or as the one fella's saying, 12 and a third. Putting this sun-dipped Superman well above infinite physical weight. It sort of puts those original numbers that they had in the first Goku vs. Superman death battle into perspective, doesn't it? That's not even our boy's final form, though. No, in fact, I think the idea of powering Superman up is more popular than it's ever been. Which is going to bring us to Scott Snyder's run on Justice League and the World Forger Punch. Ah, yes, the World Forger feat, where Superman does his best impression of the father-son Kamehameha, and nerds on the internet argue about how impressive or unimpressive it is, and I'm gonna be one of them. Real quick, for the sake of context, Superman is trapped in the 6th dimension, flies through multiple suns, and then lays the entity that creates multiverses on his back. Overall, very impressive, especially visually. So let's get a few things out of the way. 1. Superman was amped for this feat. I don't think us super bros do ourselves any favors by denying that. 2. What actually happens on the page versus what some creators say is happening is inconsistent. But both of those really don't matter because 3. Superman was still able to put down the Forger of Multiverses, and this video is about when Superman is going beyond infinity. Now, for a while, there were some who used this feat to downscale the DC multiverse and Superman. Because the 5th dimensional imp, Mr. Mixie, said the 6th dimension was the highest realm for the creators of the DC multiverse. So DC couldn't be higher than 6th dimensional. Right? Haha, surprise debunk time. First, if you take Mr. Mixie at his literal word, you'd also have to accept when he said Superman was the only one who could exist there because he'd been absorbing Mr. Mixie's 5th dimensional energy over the years, meaning base 5D or 6D Superman. But if it was a trick or a lie, so too could everything else he said be. 2. If being a realm where only the creators chill does not mean that's their limit, only that is the highest accessible realm at the time. And 3, this book used this DC map, which is way higher than 6th dimensional. More on that soon. To place DC at 6th dimensional using this feat, you'd have to ignore literally everything that came before, everything that came after, and you'd have to ignore the author of the story, who himself places these beings above concepts like space, time, and dimensionality. This really is just another example of why I say the context of a story matters, because yes, Superman was amped, and no, He probably didn't shatter the sixth dimension on his own. But trying to cherry pick this feat so that you can downplay DC or Superman himself just doesn't work for me either. Hey, I know we're all just really trying to have fun here. This brings us to the range of our second amped feat, which is going to range from 6D, let's say that's how the World Forger exists in the lower realms, to literally infinite dimensional. And that's based off of how Scott Snyder views DC's cosmology. Now, I can hear you being impatient. You don't want amped Superman high ends. You want his base for those sweet, sweet gauntlet threads. I got you, fam. No cap. That's how the kids talk these days, right? So let's move away from amped punches and talk about the times those punches have broken reality all by themselves, and the time Superman has broken dimensions using other means. Now, in the initial video that I lost all the footage to, I went a little ham here and talked about a half dozen books ad nauseum. I don't really have it in me this time. Not the time, not the energy. If you want further breakdowns or context to any of these feats, let me know and I'll make it its own video. Speaking of time, though, it's prime time, baby. That's right. Superman and how he relates to Superboy Prime and Infinite Crisis. But Daniel, I hear you say, surely you're not going to scale Superman to Superboy Prime and his retcon punches. Of course not. Because DC already does that for me. Boom, baby, let's get into it. Full disclosure, Superboy Prime is my favorite DC villain. Shocker, I know. His reality-altering, dimension-shattering retcon punches was first introduced in Geoff Johns' Infinite Crisis and later brought back in Scott Snyder's Dark Knight's Death Metal. Gee, it's almost like I'm trying to illustrate consistency between DC authors when it comes to cosmology and power. Weird. So, first things first. Superman hasn't exactly copied the retcon punch, but you know what he has done? Tanked Prime's punches that were one-shotting most people while flying through a red sun. And it's not the only time he's fought in Superboy Prime and, managed to hold his own. So however strong you think an enraged Superboy Prime is, you'd have to say that Superman has at least tanked near that level of damage. Now, it's more than reasonable to call these instances of Superman standing up to Prime outliers. After all, DC does establish Prime as a major team-killing threat in this story, though there are those that stand toe-to-toe with him, and most of them are Kryptonians. So let's get some supplementary evidence going. This story firmly establishes Golden Age Superman as roughly in the same ballpark as Prime, and Golden Age Superman and post-Crisis Superman fought each other to a standstill before they took down Prime together. And their fight was warping reality all around them and shattering worlds, though how you want to interpret this is, up to debate. So let's supplement some of this nonsense with some circumstantial examples. We have Superman standing up to Time Trapper, who is above the concept of time and just so happened to be Superboy Prime at one point in time. You have Superman fighting the new Time Trapper, Doomsday, who is roughly equal to or above the current time Doomsday that was above an infinite hell. That's right, Doomsday punched his way out of hell after conquering it. Then there's New 52 Superman's punches being able to affect every version of Brainiac. This guy is an admittedly weaker version that would later fuse his continuities with post-Crisis Superman. Him being weaker was actually a plot point in Rebirth, until it was dropped. Comics are weird. You have Superman shattering the dimensions of Dominus and Mr. Mixie's in Rebirth. Superman shattering dimensions with his punches is not exactly a stretch. But hey, I get it, that's not enough for you. So how about we direct our attention to DC Comics Presents number 29. Quick side note, if you've never read DC Comics Presents, I highly recommend it. In DC Comics Presents number 29, using just his speed, Superman busts through the bounds of infinity, and in doing so, shatters every dimensional barrier that exists in DC, save the one that is held by the Source itself. How strong is that? I don't know. How strong do you think the Source is, because it's just below that? Now, of course, admittedly, that was the Silver Age, but again, in Infinite Frontiers, continuities merged, so does that even really matter? Seriously, though, Superman just kind of makes a habit of flying through these great celestial bodies and other dimensional beings. You could probably do a whole video just on that. Now, I'm sure someone's leaving a comment about how each of these are out of context or out of continuity, so let's give them a minute to type it all out while they pause the video. Okay, you think they're done? Yes, all of these have their own individual context. For example, when Superman fought Dominus and shattered his reality, Superman was unlocking his hidden potential via Torcosm Vow, and he was still mostly losing that fight. Dominus also shapes his reality by pulling out concepts and thoughts, and warping them. But his shaping of reality is generally considered to be at least low multi-universal, so take that what you will. But really the key words here are mostly and potential. Time and time again, Superman is given a limit and pushes beyond it. And there are just plenty of examples of Superman being able to destroy dimensions and dimensional barriers. Even something as recent as Bendis' run on Superman implied he could destroy the entirety of the Phantom Zone if he so chose using his heat vision, which is its own infinite and separate space. So while he may not be altering reality with a retcon punch, he may just shatter it. Be that through hacks or sheer energy, depends on the story or how you want to read it. It's always important to check the context of those claims, and decide what statements or feats you find viable. I do think, however, there are innumerable examples and writers that have all fed into each other. Now this video is running long, even for me, and if you're still with me, I really do appreciate you, so let's bring things full circle and talk about Superman fighting concepts, and we will start with Final Crisis. It's a book that comes up a lot, either because people think it's filled with Superman wank, or because it contains that one feat that Death Battle used, or it's brought up because of its convoluted narrative concerning meta storytelling. Personally, I love this book. And not just because it's filled to the brim with Superman feats. No, I love the art, I love the stakes, but more than anything, I love Grant Morrison's writing. Their takes and contributions to the DC mythos and continuity cannot be understated. They have a deep understanding and respect for the lore and continuity. If I was more literary minded, I would do just a full breakdown of this book and the reasons I love it. In fact, one day I still might try. This book also gave Morrison a bit of a reputation as a Superman fanboy, at least in terms of the power scaling community, though I think a lot of people see that in their work across the board. They are a massive fan of the Silver Age and continuity in general, and are just willing to embrace the more fantastical elements of the medium. And sometimes that just has them carrying things to the extreme, especially with Superman. I mean, Morrison is the person that had Superman fighting angels, and I love every second of it. But do their habits of extremes mean they are sometimes inconsistent with other writers, or that you should discount the feats they put out there? I'm never going to answer that for people. At the end of the day, that's for individuals to decide. This is a video about Superman pushing himself beyond physical limits. So we're going to talk about it. First, it's important for some setup. Grant Morrison is one of the few writers I know that comes with some understanding of string theory, and they often incorporate it into their work. But not only that, they often give clear and concise numbers now and again concerning the dimensionality of DC. Here you have Alan Adam, a recurring character in Grant Morrison's work, who is said to be 8th dimensional and just so happens to also be in this story. For reference, he is below the monitors, who seem to be roughly compared to Darkseid in this story, though that's up for debate. Then you have this panel, where Morrison's DC could possibly be 196,833 dimensional. I've also heard people argue that Morrison has a DC with an infinite dimensionality, but for the life of me, I couldn't find a clear-cut panel. But Final Crisis does deal with things like the blank canvas that stories are written on, and outerversal vampires that feed on the essence of stories, so I wouldn't doubt it. Now, a lot of stuff happens in this story, so we will be skipping right ahead to my favorite feat of all time. The end of everything, Darkseid in his true form and archetypical god confronts Superman. Superman tells this conceptual force that everything vibrates at certain frequencies and that there are counter vibrations. He then turns and sings the counter vibrations, destroying Darkseid. So, how strong is this? Most may dismiss it as an outlier. Others will lowball it to 40 because Darkseid is from the 4th world. Really though, in this particular story, Darkseid is a conceptual being that is above space-time, far above Alan Adam, and stretching all the way that you believe Morrison would have him reach. Have I mentioned that Morrison made this DC map, by the way? And that Darkseid simply falling from his death was causing all of it to collapse in on itself until it would all become Darkseid. Well, isn't this just a hack, I hear you say? Sure, if you want to see it that way. You just have to ignore the fact that Superman can vibrate the molecules of his body, and then acknowledge it's a hack that could take out beings from 80 all the way to almost 200 KD, to possibly infinite. One of these days I am going to do a series where I just go through singular trades and tell you how strong Superman is in each of them, and I bet you Final Crisis Superman will come out near the top. However, if you remain unconvinced and are still looking for a book that has it all, I would recommend checking out Superman, Where Is Thy Sting? Where Superman punches out the concept of death. It has it all in one tightly wrapped, confusing package. Superman punches a conceptual being that was warping reality and then shatters said reality because death was mad. Superman wouldn't stay dead. The only real problem I have with this one is the implication it may have all been a hallucination. Another read, though, is that when push comes to shove, Superman is beyond even death. And of course, all of this kind of nonsense hasn't ended for Superman. It's one of the same reasons our boy Clark keeps going through debuffs and power-ups, and people are always going to pick and choose their favorites. So how far past infinity is Superman? Well, that's really up to the writers and what the readers choose to accept. For me, it's enough to say that Superman is beyond infinity when he needs to be. I hope you enjoyed your time here. If so, please consider a subscription and all that other YouTube nonsense. It really does go a long way. For now, that's been Starfish Sicko, aka Daniel, with truth, justice, and all of that nonsense. I'll catch you next time when we discuss just how much further he can go.